Matty Dogmoon is a counselor and creator of the Men's Toolkit for Building Friendship. His work seeks to expand the possibilities of what it means to be a man in the world, exploring challenging subject matter and confronting masculine barriers to healthy, connected relationships.
So I spent all week kind of like just ruminating. What story do I tell? What stories? What does that even look like? And I often plan things out and then just like don't even use them. So it's just part of my process. Because I really feel that story really lives inside all of us, and that we often don't get opportunities to tell them. So I'm feeling super grateful to be able to share some of, just what's happened in my life, and I think for me, like just starting out, I just want to pay my respects to all of the people in my life that have like really stepped up, and there's no way at all that I could have ever done anything in my life alone. It's always been other people there to help lift me up, and vice versa. So, and that's kind of the core of what I want to talk about today is looking at like the work that I do, and then looking at connection and belonging and relationship, and predominantly I work with men. So a lot of my perspective comes from that. But I also talk to a lot of women and a lot of people from marginalized communities and take up their stories. And so it all kind of works together. So even though I'm talking a little bit more about masculinity in men, it's actually from multiple perspectives and stories and places, because they're all interconnected. So, I grew up in Calgary mostly, and it was a pretty violent city, and like Marco was sharing earlier, it wasn't always fun, and I had to run from a lot of men, and so I'd say like most of the violence that was enacted upon me then was men, and so I grew up kind of being terrified of men, and totally unconsciously, not like ever being like, oh, I'm terrified of men, like speaking that, but I was like, it was kind of underneath everything, right? And then I moved out here, and I started meeting men who cared, and men who didn't act like the men back in Calgary, and I went, oh, that's interesting. I don't have to be scared all the time, And so I started going down that route myself, and I got involved in a men's organization. It was a rites of passage organization at 25, and I went away with them for a weekend, and it totally transformed my life. I always say it's like getting hit on the head with a spiritual baseball bat. It was just like, and it was all of these men who were not perfect by all means, but definitely trying to live in their hearts. And they were mostly older than I was. And at that point, I was pretty terrified, especially of older men. So, and that weekend I realized how much I grieved the loss of my father, who's alive, but not very present in my life. And so I had to do a lot of work around really accepting and loving him, and also just trusting men. And I still to this day have to do work around trusting men, when I walk into a room of men, to remind myself that, I'm not necessarily unsafe, right? So that's always an ongoing process. So that work has kind of taken me through my life. Like I've just kept following that, and I do some work over at Citizens Counseling, predominantly working with men. I worked at the Sexual Assault Center, so going in and teaching about how power and masculinities, what we've learned as, how we've learned to be men in the world can not always be that great, right? And so there's this script that we've been given. There's some really fantastic things as well. And so the kind of interweaving of all of those kind of brought me to school, and I started with Indigenous Studies, actually, and I really wanted to thank you for the acknowledgement of the land we're on, and why. I think the why is really important. Why do we acknowledge that? And so I was in Indigenous Studies, and their primary focus is relationship, is like relational worldviews, is like how are we in relationship? And so my lens has always been looking at what is it about being a man that I've struggled so hard to feel connected, to feel a sense of belonging, to feel a sense of purpose. Like, what is it about the way that I was raised or grew up or that I learned around me? You know, it's kind of this like question, and that is really hard. And so that school part for me was also a big challenge because I was 30, so I'm 35 now. I think I was 32, and I decided to go back to school. But I was terrified because I realized that one of my barriers was that I had a disability that had never really been acknowledged in my life, and had never a learning disability. And so it was really this transformative experience for me to step into that place and going, holy fuck, I got this thing. And then looking back at my life and going, wow, why did I struggle every step of the way? You know, because so I'm ADHD, which I always joked about, but never got a diagnosis. But I was able to like kind of avoid it, you know. I kind of had this compiling of all this work that I'd done, really deep in personal work, and then work with men in all these groups, and then school. Now I'm looking at disability, and it's this big, really big barrier for me. And it's hard, and it's still really hard, actually. It's really, every day I struggle to, keep my life moving like this, in some kind of a trajectory. But I've had some really great supports along that road, like at the schools, people in my community, teachers, and part of that has been actually sharing my story and telling it. That's how I've received a lot of those things. So I haven't been very career focused, but I like learning a lot. so I'm failing really miserably at the career side of things. But in terms of the work that I've been doing, I've been working with citizens counseling, and I helped to develop this program called Toolbox for Friendship. Tools for Friendship. And it's the only men's group that's ever existed at Citizens. And what we noticed was that our clients were coming in, and a lot of the women were saying that, like our husbands, like they don't know how to feel things. They don't know how to listen. They don't know how to have intimacy, And we were getting this feedback constantly, the same thing, like I'm my husband's only emotional support, right? And so when my friend approached me about doing this, about creating a workshop, we were going, well, what is this, right? And what we narrowed in on was intimacy and connection, and kind of isolation being this really big barrier. So this group really looked at that and like totally transformed how I look at men's lives, and it made me realize how challenging it is for me to kind of reach out for help, to be seen, to kind of be comfortable in connecting deeply and meaningfully with other people, And we did this group, and we just, again and again, it's the same story over and over and over, And doing research, you just start to realize that there's like isolation, despair, and this comes back to how we were socialized as men. So all the work that I've done around gender shows me again and again that like I was taught it's not okay to have an intimate connection with a man. I'm not allowed to feel connected. I'm not allowed to share my emotions. I didn't develop that landscape. And I have to work hard now to be emotive. Like it's something that's challenging, but a really necessary piece in connection. So all of these pieces started falling into place. And so, that work, what I've learned from it is that it's wholly possible, like that to be a full human being living in the world, that I need to be practicing these things, that I need to be challenging the normal ways I've been taught to be in the world, to have full access to deep connection and intimacy and care. And so it takes some rattling the cage, and to get an idea of how entrenched that can become in us, like, because we don't often see it. It's kind of out there operating, but we don't necessarily see it. And so last week, I have a group of 3 other men that I meet with on a weekly basis, and we have been for a year and a half. It's been really profoundly challenging and really incredible to see them every single week, no hands down. And so these are three men that I can call at any time, and they will be there for me. Okay, like that's our commitment to each other. And maybe 5 days ago, I'd gone through this like week and a half of just real depression, kind of like really low, struggling with money, and like, you know, going to the food bank, and like just all of these things just stacking up. And I just hit a real lowest I've been in a real long time. And it took me about a week. One of those guys lives upstairs from me. I've known him for 10 years. He's my best friend. It took me a week before I walked upstairs and said, this is what's going on in my life. This is what's happening, you know? And so for me, that just goes to show that, like, I've been doing this work for a while, you know, to show how thick that, the kind of like the cloak that we can wear, you know, that we're often not aware of. It's like how thick, like I'm supposed to be aware of this. This is my work. This is what I do, right? And then that struggle is still there. You know, I have literally to force myself up there, you know. And for me, see, I totally stopped looking at these cards. For me, that's the practice, right? Is in all of the work that I've been learning about, is there's this undoing of what we've been taught. And the part for me is that what I keep coming back to is that I'm not alone. And I can't do this alone either. Even though I will try every single time, I will try and do this on my own, you know. And then I'll stop and I'll go, why am I doing this by myself? Like, this happens probably a couple times a week. Why am I doing this alone? You know, like, why do I feel the need to incessantly not be seen, you know, not to have that intimacy and care, you know? And so the work that, like, what I'm working on now is developing up a practice that will allow me counseling practice and kind of coaching, counseling, and group work, where I want to help people to build up social systems in their lives. And so in Indigenous studies, what we learned about is that, you know, you need a social network, a strong social network, in order to, like, really thrive. And so it's really cool to hear all of you talking about what I want to say, is it Anowin? Anwin. Okay, I always get mixed up with Onwin, and Onwin's like a Celtic, really cool story, actually. But so really cool to hear what you get from Onwin here, because what I judge is that you get a lot of those things from here. It's what it gives us, you know, gives you, to come to a place where you have a sense of belonging, you know, and a sense that people care about you, you know, and that you have value and meaning, you know. And what I keep on coming back to is that, in whether I'm working with men or women, it's like there's an undoing that is happening in our culture, and I think there's a lot of confusion right now, especially around gender. It's changing a lot for some good reasons, and so there's this shifting towards something new, right? And so what I'm wanting to do in my work is to help facilitate that. And I don't think that's something. I think that is about learning how to listen on a deeper level, you know. And I think that stories are a way of actually beginning that listening. I was like, on my way here, I was like, man, I feel I don't want to be that guy up there talking. And like, who am I? You know, like, why do I get to be up here talking? You know, and I was thinking about all of your stories, and like how each of our stories are so important, and that's how we grow. Michael Meade says that, you know, when you bring the stories of the young people and the elders together, that's how culture changes and transforms. And, you know, but if we're not listening to each other anymore, then we're not getting things to reflect on. We're not moving. We're not changing and transforming. I feel like I was really excited. Marco told me about this project in the first place. I was like, wow, it's amazing. Like, this is, like, I think the most important way, because in the tools for friendship at Citizens Counseling, it's mostly storytelling. I mean, we have a framework and we have some guidelines, what we're teaching, but to be quite honest, mostly what happens is I let men tell short stories to each other, and they start to realize really quickly they're not alone. You know, they start to realize really quickly that that it's through our stories that we start to build connection and intimacy and understanding and compassion, and it's an energizing experience. I think I felt most accomplished, I think, in that. I feel like to date, that's probably I feel like my biggest accomplishment is like co-creating that program with a guy named Bruce Chambers, who's really amazing. The CBC morning guy who rips apart advertising. Top-notch human. But the thing that landed for me the deepest in the last 3 times that we did it, so I got a text message from a guy in the program, and he says to me, this is the night where we kind of start cranking up the intimacy a bit, and he says to me, he said, I left feeling this feeling. He said, I left feeling something. I don't know what it is. It's like this weird flow. He says, there's this flowing happening in my life, and I'm not sure what that is. And he goes, did you do this on purpose? What's happening here? You know, like, did you build this into the program? And then, you know, I sent him a message back, and I think you're feeling connection and intimacy. You know, he couldn't identify what he was feeling, because it had been so long since he had felt it. You know, it had been such a long time that he'd felt deeply connected. And what it made me, and he's actually someone that I know and like I see surrounded by people. And so what I realized is there's a really big connection, or it's a really big differentiation between being surrounded by people and feeling connected to the people that are around us. So we can be utterly alone but surrounded by people. And so that's the kind of work that we have to do is, from my perspective anyways, is learning how to like lean into our relationships, and kind of, for a lot of people, it's asking for help, you know, saying, hey, you know, that's really hard for me. So I've done a lot of thinking about that, and one of the things that's really come to me is that I really believe in community a lot, and I've been a person that's done a lot in my community. But often people see me as not needing anything, so they don't offer. You know, they don't move. They don't say, "Hey, like, you know, can I help you with this?" Because they see me as this successful kind of person who has it all together, which is a total lie, right? And so I had to start being more vocal about it in order. And what I realized is that if we're not asking for help, and we're not looking for help as much as we're giving it. And I know a lot of people, you know, living on the streets and in transition and struggle, they give way more than a lot of the people that I know. But the other part of community, the keeping that growth going and that transformation for each of us, is that we also have to reach out into our community, you know, and that is as much a part of the building block of that evolution and that growth as giving is. So I like to try and remind myself of that.